Another insider's look now, but from a different perspective, from someone who has hands-on experience shaping the policies that ministers and leaders discuss during their G7 meetings. Rachel Curran was a policy advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. She is now a practitioner in residence of political management at Carleton University. The G7 was born out of economic crisis.
Yes.
And many believe, and it's quite true, that it's been most successful when it's been confronted with a crisis. Mm-hmm. From your point of view, how effective is it now as a leadership group, given the kind of political context that we're in?
Yeah, look, I think the G7 is certainly more effective than the G20. We have a group of countries who are natural allies and are dealing with many of the same issues, whether it's economic issues, social issues, international issues. They're dealing with many of the same problems. And so it's a useful forum, I think, to gather leaders who are natural allies and who have some of the same interests, to talk about potential solutions to problems. So I think it's a useful forum. I think it's much more useful than the, of course, much bigger G20 forum, which tends to become very unfocused. Yeah.
So when you talk about sort of shared values and shared interests, if you look at the countries of the G7 now, they seem like a more disparate group than they once were. And in fact, perhaps more inward-looking if you look at the United States, for example, and the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
What does that say about the kind of conversation they might actually be having?
Well, the U.S. has certainly become more inward-looking, and it's made a decision to kind of step back from these multilateral forums a bit. Truthfully, that's a chance for Canada to step forward and to start setting the agenda in maybe a bit more proactive a way than we have done in the past. The fact that we are hosting the next summit is also a great opportunity for us to do that. So I don't see the other countries following the U.S.'s path, really not to the same degree. They're much, I think, still very interested in engaging in these types of discussions and in working with us and their other allies and those with shared values and interests, as you've said, to kind of talk about some of these major issues. So the U.S. aside, and I agree that's a unique problem. I still think the other countries involved in this forum are really interested in using it in a useful way.
So when you look at the items that are on the agenda, and these are my words obviously, sort of economic development and jobs, gender equality and empowerment, the environment and sustainability, and security, obviously.
Yeah.
How would you describe the way Canada has driven the agenda this time?
So here's what. And I'm going to try not to be partisan about this, but we have put forth a multitude, at least half a dozen sort of priority areas that we want to talk about. All of them are good. All of them are, good areas of discussion, whether it's dealing with the impact of technology on jobs, or whether it's dealing with ocean pollution or gender equality. Any of these issues that we have flagged for discussion, I think are worth discussing. But when you have a forum like this, when you have a meeting like this, as the host, you really have the chance to drive one particular initiative. That's it. I mean, these countries all have their own political contexts. They've got their own domestic interests they're pursuing. If we are going to be effective, we need to pick one thing, one concrete thing, and we need to decide that that's what we want to drive. So of course in 2010 when we hosted the summit, the last time we hosted the then G8 summit was in Muskoka. And Prime Minister Harper at the time picked child and maternal health as the initiative that he really wanted to drive. And so Canada said, look, we're stepping up to the plate with close to $3 billion in funding. We want all of you, our allies, to contribute also, because this is a tremendously important initiative. And because we were focused on that single-mindedly,
from the get-go.
From the get-go, yeah. It was a very deliberate decision to say this is what we are going to try and drive. Yes, there are other issues worth discussing, and we will discuss them, but this is what Canada wants to achieve out of this summit. We were able to do that very successfully. So at that meeting and every meeting thereafter, Prime Minister Harper was able to secure commitments from the G7, G8 members to invest in child and maternal health. And we achieved some really notable successes on that front. Yeah.
So if perhaps this approach might be a bit too scattered or without priorities, as you suggest, is there a priority within the topics of discussion here that you think Canada is in a particularly unique position to champion?
Well, so look, I know that the current government, for various reasons, has an interest in gender issues and gender equality. That's great. If that's what they want to advance, pick one concrete thing that they want to accomplish and work towards that. So right now they've set up a gender advisory council and a few other groups who are going to advise on maybe things that the leaders might consider. Let's figure out what we want to actually do, present that to G7 leaders and say, are you on board? Are you going to work with us on this? So right now it is a little bit unfocused. Look, I'll be honest, the other thing I think we could work on is immigration. Canada has a really unique approach, uniquely successful approach, I think, to immigration policy. It's a hot issue in the rest of the G7. They're not doing so well on that front for various reasons. It's certainly an issue that we could talk about and that we could drive in the context of this meeting. But the government will, the government will choose what its priorities are. If gender issues, if gender equality is it, then pick something. Pick something they want to actually do.
There's also, I guess, the things that are not on the agenda, because as been often said, one of the advantages of these kind of meetings is that it is a small group of leaders and they have private meetings and people like policy advisors aren't invited into the room. So given that, tell me a little bit about what we might expect to watch for. Former Prime Minister Paul Martin said he thought, for example, that the United States pulling out of the Iran nuclear agreement and the trade implications of that will be something that those leaders want to discuss. From your point of view, what's the item not on the agenda that you think is going to be top of mind?
Well, that's a good question. I think trade might be it. We have, the U.S. sort of stepping back and deciding that it doesn't necessarily want to engage in these international trade agreements as actively as it has done in the past. That's not specifically on the agenda. I think other countries may want to raise that and talk about the U.S. leadership role when it comes to trade. Look, that said, at most summits, yes, the private meetings that happen on the margins of kind of the official agenda are where the real work gets done and where the interesting discussions happen. And we certainly have an opportunity, I think, to have some of those discussions with President Trump in particular, when it comes to NAFTA, which is a critically important file for our country. For the Prime Minister to kind of engage with the President on that file in the context of this meeting, perhaps in a private discussion, will be really important. And I'm sure that Prime Minister will have private discussions with the other leaders as well. The advantage, though, of this G7 forum is because it's so small, those private meetings are useful, but the meetings of all the leaders are also useful. So if they can talk about things like the Iran nuclear deal, if they can talk about things like how do we encourage and promote trading relationships in a way that works for all of our populations, it's a small enough table that they can actually make good progress on those issues too.
Thank you very much for your insight.
Thanks, Alison.